to Ofcom to insist that they continue to do so into the future.
Sir David Davis, final question.
Mr. Speaker, last year nearly 50 British universities were identified as having research ties with what were deemed to be very high-risk Chinese institutions. Subsequently, the intelligence services briefed 24 universities on resisting the infiltration attempts of foreign agencies, but the Intelligence and Security Committee report says that it's highly likely that joint UK-China research projects are used for military purposes. What is the department doing to protect both our research and our security?
I'm grateful for the question. This government is working closely both with individual universities, the university sector and our intelligence community to make sure that our research is world-class but is also safe and secure.
Right, we now come to questions to the Deputy Prime Minister, Belrabira Ade.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Prime Minister.
I've been asked to reply. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has attended the G20 summit, strengthening the UK's ties with major economies to drive jobs and security at home. And, Mr. Speaker, this week marks 1,000 days of Putin's barbaric war in Ukraine. We will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. And, Mr. Speaker, this week also marks Equal Pay Day. I am extremely proud that this government has introduced the Employment Rights Bill, strengthening the rights of working women and making work pay. And, Mr. Speaker, this morning I will have meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in the House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently met with members of the British Association for Biological Anthropology and Osteoarchaeology, who highlighted a loophole in the Human Tissues Act which allows human remains to be auctioned, frequently disguised as modified items or replicas. This has included a fetal skeleton posed under a glass dome, a human thigh bone turned into a cane, a human jawbone necklace, and the varnished skull of a 6-year-old, often from indigenous communities in Africa and Asia stolen during colonial expeditions. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree that it is an abhorrent for human remains, regardless of their origin or age, to be sold by auction houses and on social media sites like Instagram, Facebook, eBay, Etsy and Gumtree? And will the government take action to end this depraved practice?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this sensitive issue, and it's absolutely horrifying to hear the account of what my honourable friend mentions, and I absolutely agree that that's abhorrent. And while the Human Tissue Authority strictly regulates the public display of human remains with fines or imprisonment for breaches, it does not cover sales or purchases. However, I will ensure that a meeting is made with the appropriate minister to discuss the troubling cases that she raises.
We now come to Alex Burkhardt, the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Very happy to associate myself and this side of the House with the remarks the Right Honourable Lady made about Ukraine. Democracies must stand together. What is the government doing to bring down inflation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it's astonishing that, and first of all, can I welcome the Right Honourable Member to his place? And many people might not know, Mr. Speaker, but the Honourable Member was the Minister for Growth when, under Liz Truss, inflation was 11.1% and growth flatlines, so we're doing much better than he did.
Well, the truth is that this, thanks to I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for her standard charm. The truth is, this government isn't doing anything to bring down inflation. This government is stoking inflation. First, we had above-inflation pay rises for the unions. Then, we had a budget which the OBR said would increase inflation.
Order. Sorry. Right, I'm going to hear the question. I suggest we all hear it together, then our constituents can understand the answer as well as the question. Alex Burke.
Very kind, Mr. Speaker. First, we had above-inflation pay rises for the unions. Then we had a budget which the OBR said was going to push up inflation. This morning, we had city economists, real economists, Mr. Speaker, saying that next year inflation would hit 3%. Does the Right Honourable Lady agree that this government's decisions mean higher inflation for working people?
Mr. Speaker, I'll ask the honourable gentleman, 11.1% or 3%?
We've already talked about Ukraine, Mr. Speaker. It was Ukraine and COVID that drove up inflation. This government is doing it to the British people. High tax, high inflation, low growth, low reform. There's a word for that, Mr. Speaker. It's Starmerism. Yesterday, like many honourable members on this side of the House, I spoke to farmers from across the United Kingdom. Some of them families who farmed their land for centuries, elderly men in tears, children worried about their parents, all of them worried that their way of life is about to be destroyed. What would the Right Honourable Lady like to say to them?
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, we are absolutely committed to our British farmers, and that's why we've committed £5 billion to the farming budget over the next 2 years. That's the largest ever amount for sustainable food production in the UK. And it's alongside £60 million, Mr. Speaker, to support those affected by extreme wet weather, and over £200 million to tackle disease outbreaks. His party couldn't even get the money out the door for farmers, failing to spend over £300 million on farming budgets. The farmers know they ruined it for them, and that's why we're in government and they're not.
Well, perhaps the Right Honourable Lady thinks that everyone came to London yesterday to thank the government. Let's look at the facts. A typical mid-sized 360-acre family farm in the constituency of my Right Honourable friend for Thirsk and Moulton. They've spoken to their accountant. Their new liability because of this government is £500,000. That's 12 years' worth of profit. When this generation passes away, that farm will become totally unviable, and it's just one of thousands and thousands of similar farms. It's clear the government hasn't got its facts right. The Central Association for Agricultural Valuers, the real experts in this field, say so. The NFU says so. They're shortly to publish a report showing that 75% of all commercial farms will fall above the threshold. If the government isn't going to reverse this terrible policy, will the Right Honourable Lady at least commit that there will be no further increases to inheritance tax and no further reductions to agricultural property relief or business property relief in this Parliament?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about the facts, and I absolutely stand by the figures the government has set out. And the vast majority of estate owners will be totally unaffected. He wants to talk about the figures, Mr. Speaker. I will be crystal clear. The vast majority of estate owners will see no change and pay no tax on land passed on valued at £1 million. Couples can pass on £3 million, Mr. Speaker, tax-free, and those above the thresholds will pay only half the normal rate and can pay over 10 years interest-free.
This is just another part of the budget that's unravelling, Mr. Speaker. Everyone here and all the farmers at home will have heard there was no guarantee there. We know what that means. They're coming back for more. And even if the Honourable Lady had made a promise today, it wouldn't have been worth a fig. We know that the Environment Secretary, before the election, promised the farmers this wouldn't happen. Labour promises get broken. Let's put all of this into context. The Treasury says the family farms tax will raise, on average, £441 million a year. The Treasury also says that the public sector pay rises the government announced in July will cost £9.4 billion a year. That's over 21 times as much. Why does the government think that above-inflation pay rises for the trade unions are worth so...
Order! Now then, I don't need any more from the second bench. Can I just say, please, less of it. We've had a bit of a run-in recently, and I don't need to have any more. Right. Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's an audacity for the honourable gentleman to stand there and suggest in some way that Labour broke promises or raised taxes. When I'll school the honourable gentleman, it was his government that raised taxes to the highest level for a generation. It was his government. It was his government.
Sorry? We'll have less as well, unless you want to go and have a cup of tea. Have we heard any more? Is that it now? Yes or no? Absolutely, you're the one that was mouthing. Well, I'm sorry, you must be able to do it like a ventriloquist dummy. Prime Minister.
It was his government that crashed the economy, that saw inflation rise to 1.1% and grow flatline. It was his government that spent the reserves 3 times over. I'll take no lessons from the honourable gentleman.
Alex Burkhardt.
I understand why the right honourable lady doesn't want to answer questions about the terrible choices the government have made. It's because the truth is ugly. The truth is that this is a punishment meted out to people who don't vote Labour. It's the same punishment meted out to parents who send their children to private schools. It's the same punishment meted out to the owners of small businesses terrified about national insurance contributions. And it's the same punishment meted out to pensioners who can't afford to pay their fuel this winter. Isn't it the truth, Mr. Speaker, that if you don't vote Labour, they don't care about you?
There will be more, and it won't be what you want more of. Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, after that display, he clearly didn't recognise the result of the general election and has learnt nothing. While this government has been fixing the mess that they left, the Conservatives have been desperately trying to rewrite history. They come here every week, jumping on a new bandwagon, taking a new pot shot, but absolutely no word on what they'll do differently. Last week, the Leader of the Opposition admitted she supported Labour's plans to invest in NHS, schools and homes. But what they want is all the benefits of the budget, Mr. Speaker, but have no idea how they'll pay for it. Mr. Speaker, the faces may change, but it's the same old Tory party. Straight back to putting everything on their credit card, spending their reserves 3 times over. We took the difficult decisions to fix the £22 billion black hole that they left behind, and while they're reinventing the past, we're investing in the future.
Andy MacDonald. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a new report, Human Rights Watch have set out irrefutably how Israeli authorities are committing the war crimes of forcible transfer in Gaza, which amounts to crimes against humanity. Israel's evacuation system fails to ensure civilian safety. Civilians are not provided with access to health, nutrition and shelter, compounded by the banning of UNRWA, with much of Gaza now uninhabitable. Will the government acknowledge that Israel has carried out mass forced displacement in Gaza, and will it take concrete measures on arms trade and Israeli officials in order to comply with its duty to prevent genocide and protect Palestinian lives?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The situation in the Middle East is catastrophic, and I know the whole House is horrified at the terrible loss of civilian life. We are calling at every opportunity for an immediate ceasefire with the release of the hostages and more aid into Gaza. But we do urge Israel to ensure that UNRWA can continue its life-saving work, something the Foreign Secretary has discussed directly with the Israeli Foreign Minister. And we've imposed sanctions in response to appalling incidents of settler violence and suspended export licences for arms following a review that found a clear risk that they may be used to commit or facilitate violations of international law. And we will continue to seek to a two-state solution with a secure Israel, Mr. Speaker, alongside a viable and sovereign Palestine.
Come to Daisy Cooper, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I associate myself and the Liberal Democrats with the Deputy Prime Minister